You may have noticed our new branding and our fabulous new website at StageLeftPodcast.com. Well, as musicians, do you ever finish your song, EP, album, really happy with what you created, but think, what now? What's next? What visuals suit the work I've created? What about the graphic design? Or even worse, you hire a photographer who you spend money on, but they don't quite land the vibe you're going for. Well, the answer is Hues, which is run by the creative genius that is Bastian Hues, who is a brilliant musician in his own right and will take your nuanced story and create a vision around it. It's such a clever process that Bastian has designed and really is the answer to your kind of what's next question. So if you head to bastianhues.com, that's BASTIANHUES.com, or Instagram Bastian Hues, the first 5 people who mention Stage Left will get a free branding consultation session with him, which I cannot tell you, how valuable that stuff is really. So do go over to bastianhues.com, because many, many times we get sucked into a world of doing take after take or endlessly tweaking mixes for our work of art we've created and then just think, well, what's next? What now? Well, bastianhues.com is your answer, because it's a safe, trusted pair of hands for the next stage of your work of art.
Nick will play differently every night. I mean, he is kind of like a jazzer in a way. He listens to what's going on. And sometimes he might play a slightly different rhythm to what he normally does. It's kind of like an actor knows their lines back to front, where they can change emphasis every night. The reason that we rehearse down to a T, it's not so that we can play it like that every night. It's so that we know this is it. And then we know where we can play around within it.
Okay, welcome to the Stage Left Podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young musicians entering an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of some of the unsung heroes behind the success. So go to thestageleftpodcast.com for all episodes featuring members of Radiohead, Supergrass, Jungle, Queen, Earth, Wind and Fire, Guns N' Roses, Fleetwood Mac, The 1975, Madness, Oasis, The Zootons, The Prodigy and Kraftwerk, who discuss their writing, recording and performing processes, as well as reflective interviews with musicians and producers who've worked in the studio and on stage with the Beatles, Beyonce, Elvis and David Bowie. Today we are joined by guitarist in both the Blockheads and Nick Mason's band Saucerful of Secrets, Lee Harris. We'll be discussing what it's like playing actual Pink Floyd songs with a member of Pink Floyd, can you believe that? And also including being joined on stage by Roger Waters last year or two, upcoming world tours, preparing to play at Royal Albert Hall, which is coming soon, advice for young musicians, and we'll be paying tribute to Blockheads frontman Derek Hussey, who sadly passed away a few days before this recording. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest down the stage of podcast is none other than Lee Harris. Thanks for joining us today, Lee. How's it going?
Hi, Chris. Yeah, all good. Just still processing the loss of Derek, but all good. All good. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's the only place to start. So the news reaches a couple of days about his passing. He was known as a poet. He was the Blockheads kind of frontman for the new era. He was a real storyteller. What did you love about him as an individual, and what has the world lost both as a person and as a musician?
He was a bandmate and a workmate, but he was my friend. So I'm going to just miss being able to phone him up and get his take on things. I don't think I never had a crossword with him and vice versa. And he was just extraordinarily funny, which probably is not coming out at the moment because it's not a very nice time. But he was just a really funny guy, and he had a very good take on the world. He looked at the perversities of life, and I was going to say he stepped into Ian's shoes. He didn't really step into Ian's shoes. He was his own man. And of course, Ian was irreplaceable. And I was saying to one of the guys in the band the other day that, the irony of him not being around is that what the hell do they do going forward? He'd not really been himself for a little while. I think lockdown had affected him, but I thought he'd get out of the rut. And when they were trying to think about what they were going to do, I think it was they weren't sure. I don't think Derek wanted to carry on doing it anyway. So you end up with this thing where he's also irreplaceable. So that I suppose if they carry on, then they'll have to find someone who, again, is not like him. I think. What was the other part of the question, Chris? You just asked me.
So him as a human, and what has the world lost with him as a musician as well?
I think it's actually what I was just saying. That it was just the way he looked at things, and he was very much his own guy. I think Ian's lyrics were more about characters, I think, and I always thought Derek was like one of those characters that had come to life and was now writing songs in the band. Yeah, and I think with his passing, perhaps might be getting a bit deep, but I think perhaps some of the songs or the albums that he did, I think he recorded 3 albums with the band. They might now, people now listening to them will possibly not tie them in with the whole Ian Dury aspect, especially as they're not going to be probably performed alongside the Ian Dury songs. I think it'd be very difficult for anyone to replace Derek. So I don't know if I don't really work with the band anymore, so I don't know. But I think I'd be surprised if they carried on playing Derek songs. I think they'd probably be more likely that they would carry on doing Ian songs if they carry on. Who knows? It's early days. But yeah, the world's just lost someone else who just looks at things in a certain way and it comes out. He just had a great humour.
And he was a great character. And it's, for those who aren't aware, that he was actually, I think he acted in as a carer at one point for Ian Dury, and used to see him onto the stage at times and then have a quick wave and everyone introduced. And then once Ian passed away, he became more and more involved with the band, and eventually he became the frontman.
It was more of I mean, he wasn't so much a carer. He was just like the guy who, because he had polio, so he was the guy that he walked him on, then he walked him off, and then they probably smoked a spliff when they went off, I should think, whatever they... What happened was when they decided to carry on, I'd had a jam with Norman, the bass player. And at this point in my career, I didn't really have a career, to be honest. I'd left school. I don't know if I'm probably going to jump in here and start, free associating. Okay. When I left school, it was like 1991, and I was very much sort of blues rock guitar player. And I was probably about 15 years too late. So everyone, whenever there were adverts for looking for a guitar player, it must be into Pearl Jam or Nirvana, and no one really wanted guitar solos. This went on for years. And I did massive tours of rehearsal rooms, just from one band to another, and not really getting a lot of success. So I decided eventually get in the business doing something else. And I ended up in middle management at Ticketmaster, which everyone will hate. But it was actually a very interesting job because you find all about ticketing and it's something that people don't think about, all that kind of stuff. But while I was at Ticketmaster, I managed to get this jam with Norman, and I phoned in sick, I think, at work. And because I still had my hand in and I was playing every now and then. And we got on really well. And I think Ian died about a month after this jam, and Norman was saying, we're going to carry on, but I think we're just going to do the songs and shout the choruses, because they really had no idea how they were going to carry on, but they wanted to play together. And then they did do a gig at Dingwalls. It was the first post Ian's death gig. And Phil Jupitus joined and did things like What a Waste and Rhythm Stick and Sex and Drugs and what those sorts of songs. And they had a couple of their own things that they played, and Johnny, the guitar player, was singing. Johnny is from up north, so he'd sing with this sort of weird Cockney accent that was with a bit of Geordie, and it sounded a bit like the PG Tips Chibs or whatever they were, like a bit funny accent he'd have when he was doing. What happened was Derek would sing a couple of the newer songs that they'd recorded with Ian that he never played live. They gave them to Derek to sing. And then at some point, Derek started, I think, writing a couple of songs with Chaz. And I was noticing that because Johnny was now not playing and singing at the same time, their synergy was back. The actual chemistry within the band was back, because the guy who's usually playing guitar was now playing guitar a lot more and concentrating on that, and was able to funk it up more, where previously he'd been singing and concentrating on that. So then it just became this, it was like a natural thing, really. It just became obvious that actually that's what should happen. And that's how Derek ended up doing that. Yeah.
And what about your involvement? So how did you go from working in middle management at Ticketmaster to being in like such a cool band? That's an interesting leap.
So really, my role with them, Mickey Gallagher, the keyboard player, and I were co-managers, but they're pretty impossible to manage. So we'd say we were the caretakers. And what happened was I was at work one day. I noticed that they suddenly had, I think there were 3 gigs going on sale for them in very small places. And I was also on their website at the time, looking at it. And it was like, it's taken a long time, but we finally got some gigs. I thought, oh no, don't talk to the audience like that. Just present them with the gigs, And so I contacted the website and said, hey, I'm a friend of Norman's. I work at Ticketmaster. We've got tickets for the shows on sale. Why don't you link? And I immediately got an email back from this guy called Mickey. And I was like, I wonder if that's the keyboard player who I've idolised for all these years. And it was. And I think his email said something like, how do I do that? So he gave me his number and I called him up, and then it just snowballed from there. What happened was the job found me, really. I was saying earlier on that I hadn't really been having a lot of success making money full-time doing music. So now I was presented with basically one of my absolute favourite bands, and they don't really have any idea of business. Mickey obviously did. As a whole, they're musicians, they just want to play. And because of my job, I was used to, I wasn't in marketing, but I was used to how all that worked. Obviously, I could get tickets for gigs to put on the computer system to sell. And I wasn't that happy with how they were presenting themselves on the website. And I taught myself how to be a webmaster, basically, and started going to their gigs and taking pictures to put on their website. Then I started collecting the money at the gigs, and then I started getting them gigs. And then once they realised that I could actually play guitar, that was handy for them as well, because Johnny Turnbull, the guitar player, he played with Bob Geldof at the time and World Party as well. So he would then be able to go off and do a 20-date tour or maybe something like that with Geldof, because we might only have 4 shows. So obviously a bit daft for him to turn down 20 gigs for 4. So I would step in for him and do that. Chaz Jankel, who basically wrote all the material, every now and then he might miss something. Not often, but he might. So then I'd depth for Chaz, and Mickey would play all the keyboards because he plays half-half. And then Mickey got himself involved in the Animals and Friends, which was just the drummer from the Animals. And
sounds familiar.
Yeah. Nick Mason's Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said that. But yeah, he would end up doing a lot of shows, and then I would dep for Chaz, and Chaz would do all the keyboards. So that'd be quite funny, because you'd be depping for the guy who's actually sitting behind you watching. So, and that's how that happened. And I probably did about, I've never counted it all up, it's probably around 60 shows that I did with them in a period of something like 10 or 11 years or something. I was with them for 12. Yeah.
And it's quite interesting being middle manager, Ticketmaster, and then you obviously became co-manager of the band through that osmosis of getting involved through all the different kind of ways of, and then you describe them as being impossible to manage, which is really interesting. Was there anything that you did try that either did work for young musicians listening to this, or young managers potentially for bands, that does work, if it's the equivalent of herding cats perhaps, or just you've got difficult personalities or whatever it might be?
That's really funny you say herding cats, because that's exactly how we described it, Mickey and I. Mickey, that was Mickey's thing. He always said it was like herding cats. I think the most obvious thing was that promoters were never really understood why we did what we did. So the most obvious thing for bands is to, especially bands that might go out on tour that haven't got an album, but maybe like the Specials at one point, before they had their last album come out, before that, they would get together and maybe, I'll probably find out I'm completely wrong, but it felt to me that they were doing a tour every year or every 18 months, and they'd play Brixton and then they'd come back 18 months later and do it. And that is the most obvious way of doing things. But with the Blockheads, I think the worry was that, because what I was just saying about various members playing in other bands, and it wasn't just those 3, all of them playing with other people. Norman famously works with Wilco Johnson and has done for nigh on 40 years now or so. We would play, I think when I started with them, it wasn't that many. It was probably about 16 gigs a year, 16, 18. By 2009 or so, we were having 50 gigs a year, which averages out obviously like one every weekend. I mean, we're out a lot, and consequently, you'd play London 6 times in the year, as opposed to one night at Shepherd's Bush. So you'd end up doing that. And that would primarily be because we'd be worried that if we did do what everyone else does, they might not be a band in 18 months because they might all be off with other people. I don't know how that would translate to young musicians nowadays, but it's probably explaining why they did what they did.
And what about rehearsing with, you used to get guest singers inside, and you mentioned Phil Jupiter's. I think Martin Freeman did something with you as well.
Martin he sang a song on a movie called Confetti that was, I can't remember what it was like. It was like a kind of Mike Leigh type thing, although it was a comedy. He would come. I think he only sang with us twice. It was just like one song he did, I think, and I think he DJ'd a couple of times as well.
In that situation, so is that a case of no? You would just come up and do.
I never even rehearse with them. The Blockheads and Guy Pratt, who the bass player who's in Saucerful and everything else that Guy has done. Be here for the whole podcast going through his credits if I'm not careful. Guy never got an audition. He never got a rehearsal with them. I went round to his place, listened to him and gave him pointers where he might need them or if he was asking. But no, they never ever rehearsed. That's a lie. They did. And
would they
once.
just then play it?
Yes, play exactly that. They would play it like if it was a track that wasn't like the studio records, I would have a desk mix, which I would give to someone. There might be, we'd get a saxophone player. Often we'd have to-depth sax players, and hopefully you can use your pool of them that you always use, and sometimes you can't. The easiest thing then was to be able to get desk mixes and just say, listen to this, or if it was one of the classic songs, you'd want them to copy them because they're the ones that have got parts that everyone remembers. But I think usually it would just be a desk mix that I'd give someone to listen to. And again, like Jupiter's actually didn't even need to do rehearsal. He knew all the words. One night he didn't. We were in, it's not there anymore, but it was the LA2, which was by the Astoria, which is now part of Crossrail, I think.
That's right.
But we were doing What a Waste, and it's got quite a lot of words. Well, they all do. And it got to the third verse, and he just couldn't remember what the next line was. And he went over to Derek, who was just standing there with a shaker, shaking it, looking right to the back of the auditorium, and went, "What's the next line?" And Derek goes, "I don't know, I wasn't listening." It's really funny.
Amazing. You guys must have had so many good stories and such a great experience in that time. It's a great tribute that you pay to Derek there. If you could, big question now, if you could relive a 6-month period between the ages of 0 and 20, what would it be and why? What would it be and why?
On the spot. I think, now you shouldn't really have regrets, but I think I'd probably revisit back to some point between 18 and 20 when I was on my arse, waiting for something to happen, thinking it will happen, and make myself go out there and just network a bit more, rather than just sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring. I think that's the one thing. Obviously, I don't regret anything because I'm now doing something that I always thought back then was going to happen. But it doesn't just happen. But I think that's what I do. I think I spent a fair bit of time not doing enough to forward myself in a music career, I think, at that point.
Who shaped you as an individual more than any other? And that could be someone, or actually someone you never even met in those early years.
I think not in the way of sitting on my arse not doing anything, but very much my parents. Very much my parents, because they have always been very happy for me to follow whatever I was doing. They just wanted me to be happy, and that my father is a cinematographer. He actually now is the head of cinematography at the National Film and Television School. And so he was used to working in media. And my mum was his agent, so she obviously understood it all as well. So they were always, I think if my sister, who is an agent for photographers and stylists, and she's in America, I think if we'd come home and said we wanted to be accountants, they would have been appalled. So I think really I'd have to say my parents.
Great answer. What was most people have really defining gig that they went to in maybe early 20s or late teens. What would be your defining gig that you went to? There are actually two. One was Pink Floyd, The Wall. Let's get this wrong. I was 7 years old. Saw it at Earl's Court. See, that's what I mean about my parents. They were taking their kid to see
Pink Floyd show at Earl's Court when he was 7.
Nice.
When I did 7? Yeah, I was 7 years old. And that just I remember it like it was yesterday. That's the really strange thing about it. It really stayed in my head. It was an amazing spectacle. A lot of people who've I think most people who saw it can remember it. And it wasn't actually filmed, and it was filmed, but it's never been put out on home video. But Roger Waters did record the one he did about 10 years ago or whenever it was. So a lot of people have seen that and can see what the spectacle is. Obviously, it was a lot different to the original one in the way that you've now got high definition projection as opposed to what there was back then. But it was the same. It was the same thing, and it was incredible. And the other one that stood out was when I went to see the Dire Straits at Hammersmith Odeon. And at that point, I was 12. I was 13, actually. And I wanted to be a film director. I wanted to work in the film business like my dad. And at some point in the show, as a surprise to the audience, Knopfler brought Eric Clapton out. And I was never really a big Eric Clapton fan, nor was my dad, actually. And a lot of people aren't nowadays. But we're not going to go there. But
let's talk about the music.
Yeah. But he came out, and I was just in total awe. And I'd seen a lot of concerts by that point, but I think it was because it was a surprise and everyone went mad. And I actually left my seat and walked up the front. And I think because I was so young, people didn't mind. They said, get away. So I got right at the front, and I was just mesmerised by his guitar playing. And from then on, that was it. I had to be a guitar player.
Can you pinpoint what it was, given you've been to a lot of concerts, about his specific guitar playing? Was it just the atmosphere? Because
it was the atmosphere which made me get up and go. But he was playing, he did a Dire Straits song followed by Further On Up the Road, an old blues number. And that was the thing that got me. It wasn't him playing on the Dire Straits one. It was the blues. And actually, I'm now realising I'd never seen any blues up to that point. I'd seen maybe Joe Cocker playing a bluesy-ish number, but he wasn't doing a 12-bar. And again, I'd seen obviously like Santana, but he wasn't playing blues. He was playing bluesy rock. Maybe it was the fact that it was a 12-bar and it was blues, and it just spoke to me. And then after that, and I did get a guitar, and then I became a very sort of precocious, boring blues purist at the age of 13. So maybe that is
popular at school.
Maybe that's what exactly. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was that. But yeah, but definitely the atmosphere, everyone going mad. That's what got me.
And I'm guessing you were in blues bands for quite a while. Like, what was the journey between kind of that stage for your musical output to when you began in the Blockheads?
I had my father at this point was probably the top TV commercial cameraman in Europe. And as such, his bank account obviously was a bit bigger. So I wanted to go. I went to boarding school, and I hated it when I went there. And because I got really homesick. And that actually, I really got into playing blues because I was just so unhappy. And I spent a lot of time with tablature, which is, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's, if you can't read music, it's 6 lines that represent a guitar string, and the frets will be numbered on the lines, 15, and so 15, 17, 15 when they're doing solos, they're always high numbers. So I would learn stuff like that, and I also learned drums when I was there. I really got into music. And one of the things about being at the boarding school was, obviously there were a lot of boys, there were a lot of kids, and girls in the sixth form, but there were a lot of kids there. And we'd have music competitions, and consequently you would play to 600 people or so, which, you know, and I did it on a regular basis because I'd organise concerts. We'd do covers, and we would do Floyd, and the most obvious thing was to get my house to sing "We Don't Need No Education." We do Like Breaking the Wall 2 or whatever, and then we'd play it to 600 people, and then I'd play One Like Hell or whatever. And consequently, I think it was a weird thing because you felt like you were famous because everyone in the school knew who you were. They didn't know someone else was, but they knew you because they'd been watching you. And then if it was a holiday, I'd be out in town in London where we lived. I might walk down the King's Road and people would go, "Hi, it'd be someone from school." It was a very weird existence. But I finished, when I left there, there was a band all set up of guys in the year above me whose singer was, his parents were music managers and managed Elaine Page, Sheena Easton, and some other people. And I was supposed to walk straight into that band, and they'd waited for me for a year. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out. I left school, just decided I don't want to do this. So then I went off and I'm trying to think. Yeah, there was actually a mate of mine at school. His brother is a guy called Matt Biffer, who actually now is a music supervisor. And he does things like The End of the World that Graham Coxon did the music for.
Wow.
Yeah. He's a really successful one. And he was doing solo shows on his own and in pubs in Fulham. And I went to see one or two and I thought, well, I could do that because I didn't have a band. So I just went and got an electroacoustic, and made up my own set of old blues covers, actually. Obviously, I should say, not actually. And booked gigs. And I actually ended up supporting Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin.
Really?
Yeah, because the pub,
That escalated.
this is the thing. This is what I was saying about networking. Is that you got to be in it to win it. You never know what's around the corner, but you do have to be in it to win it. And what happened was there was another band as well, which had about 3 or 4 gigs, but we got to know these guys in this pub in Fulham called the King. And Robert Plant.
I've played there. I know that. Zeppelin used to play there back in the day. Yeah.
Zeppelin used to rehearse.
That's
I
it. They
think, up
rehearsed.
the road.
Yeah.
And when Plant was in 1993, I think it was, had an album called Fate of Nations came out, he decided he wanted to rehearse there to keep it real, as it were. And they did a couple of secret shows. So it was only like, 250 people could get in there or something like that. Even then, that's a push. And they asked me to be the opening act because I was one guy on his own. They didn't want to get another band. They wouldn't have been able to fit another band on there. So that's how I got that. And then, of course, from there, I then met someone who I'm still friendly with to this day, who was championing me as a favourite guitar player nowadays, all this sort of stuff. And actually, she worked for Hit and Run, which was Genesis's company. And Tony Smith is their manager, and Tony Smith is Nick Mason's manager. So I've had a complete full circle. It's really strange how that works out. It is a small business, though. People do, you do run into people.
This is Gem Archer, and you're listening to the StageLeft Podcast.
Fucking one.
I'm interested in how it came about that you found yourself in a position where you went, okay, I'm going to go up to a member of Pink Floyd, book a meeting and say, let's do some Pink Floyd songs. How do you feel about it? Which seems outrageous, but you actually pulled it off and you actually booked a meeting with...
The common bond, the common thread in the band is Guy. We are all friends with Guy. We might not have all been friends with each other before, or we might have met each other once or twice, but he is actually all of our friend. And I left the Blocks, I left the Blockheads, and I got married, and my wife and I came to France, and we bought a house and we were renovating and building it. And Guy was on about 3 hours away with David Gilmour. So I went to the show and met up with Guy, and I hadn't played guitar. I think basically hadn't really picked it up for about a couple of years, something like that, because I've been working. And I was, instantly enthused to play again, watching David. And so I got some pedals out and bought some other ones and was getting into all that now. And for about a year. And then he came round again, another 3 hours away. And I went to that, and I took my dad with, actually. And I think because I'd just been stuck at home, not playing with anyone, I really missed playing. And I was watching the gig and I was just thinking, God, I'd love to play some Pink Floyd stuff with Guy. Because all I'd been doing for a year was playing Pink Floyd along to records or whatever. And I was thinking, Guy's not going to want to go out and play any of this stuff that he's playing with David, with me, probably not with anyone else. So maybe there'd be some other stuff. And then I think, as I was just watching, I know, because I was watching it in an amphitheatre. This was in a place called Nîmes. was a Roman amphitheatre, and it made me think of Pompeii. And because I was thinking of Pompeii, I was thinking of that era, and I was suddenly thinking, they didn't play any of this stuff. They were focusing on everything after Dark Side, because there's stuff like Set the Controls, The Heart of the Sun on there, and I've got blank now. There's other stuff we play, Saucerful of Secrets, obviously. And then I just thought, I wonder, I've got the bass player in my head, obviously not Roger, but it's Guy. I've got Floyd's bass player. What about Nick? That's the rhythm section. That's the most obvious thing to go to. So I wrote to Guy soon after the gig and told him the idea. And he said, the idea was, do you think Nick would be interested in getting a band together and playing the old stuff from the early years, is actually what I said. I didn't say specifically before Dark Side, but I did say the early years. And he said, it's a great idea, but he went, I don't think we'll go for it. And then I went off, and then I suddenly was thinking, I think this is actually quite an interesting thing. And I went off and spoke to a guy called Tom Wilcox, and Tom had helped put together the band Holy, that was made up of
Tony Visconti,
yes, and Woody Woodmansey, although not anymore Woody. But I called him up because he's actually good at putting things together, getting things off the ground. And he said, what you should do is you should focus on the Syd Barrett years. I was like, the thing is, there aren't that many songs from that era, but maybe that is what we could do. And then that made me think about, okay, the early years should be Syd Barrett and everything that I was thinking of that they don't play anymore, that Roger and the tribute bands and David don't play. And about 3 weeks later, I went back to Guy. I said, look, I can't get it out of my head. How do I get the idea to him? And he said, all right, write it out properly and I'll get it to him. And I put together a sort of what looked like a business plan, because I was thinking, Nick Mason's a businessman, he'll want to see it like that. So I did it like that, and he sent it off to Nick, and 2 hours later Nick said, that's really interesting. And that was it. Took a while to get together though, because he had the Pink Floyd exhibition was launching, and just getting everyone together was tricky. I think Gary and I got together in early 2017, and then we didn't actually, it then took us about 10 months till the 5 of us actually got in a room and played. But once we did that, it was very quick. Management were jumped on it, basically.
But before that, I think a good kind of thing just to pin to nail down into from a learning point of view is you would have had a meeting with someone that, let's not say idolise, but someone that you admire greatly.
I did, that's correct. I did idolise him. Yeah.
And also, you must have realised that was such a pivotal meeting. You're going to be going on a tour soon, and you're going to be playing Royal Albert Hall and stuff like that, which probably wasn't on your radar at that point of your career.
No.
So how did you prepare for that meeting, and what advice? There is going to be musicians who, and actually anybody in life who's not a musician, who's going to have this kind of pivotal meeting in their life. What did you do to make sure that went smoothly?
I just made sure that I knew what I'd written in the business plan, and I was obviously confident about the idea, and I was confident because he thought it was a good idea. I think the funny thing about that meeting was, and it's a good learning thing, because you can prepare for things and they often never go the way that you think. And what happened was Guy was late for the meeting, so I was sitting in front of Nick, and Nick was saying maybe we should wait for Guy, and I said okay. And I got a text from Guy saying I'm going to be there in 15 minutes. So I was just sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do. And then Nick said he was trying to make conversation. So he says, what have you been up to? Probably expects me to say, reel off a list of sessions that I've just done. And I went, I've just been building a house. And it wasn't what he was expecting to hear. And he didn't know what to say. So it went quiet. But yeah, really, it was just being confident about what was going to happen. And it went really well. And actually in that meeting, Nick put forward the idea of having Gary and Kem, and Guy put forward the idea of having Don Beacon, who I knew as on keys. And so we just kept to that. We didn't then, I think I might have looked at inviting someone else to play keyboards, because I wasn't sure if Don wanted to do the work of 2 people. It turned out he did. But at one point I wasn't sure if he did, so I phoned around. But it was really just, I'm trying to think how else I would have prepared, but I think that's the honest answer. I was confident about it. Yeah, I was happy with the idea, and I just made sure I knew what I'd written down.
And so once it was like the thumbs up, let's do this. Is it a case that you just then sent, okay, this is my recommendation for the songs that we should learn at first? Is it just a small pool of songs? Or how do you deal with that when you've got such a big personality as Nick? Do you say, Nick, what do you want to do? I'm just interested in that dynamic because it's a new band, but you've got such a kind of a profile there.
I think what's important for people to take on board with people who they idolise is that normally they want to be treated normal. They don't want you to treat them like an anorak might. And that was the thing with Nick. And Nick has always gone out of his way to make us feel like a band. And we do feel like a band.
How does he do that? What does he do to do that?
I think he doesn't make all the artistic decisions. He throws all that open to us. And it's always been, I mean, Gary always says it's always whoever shouts loudest. There isn't any shouting, but that is how it works. And you've got to remember as well that Nick has been in a band with people who are famous for falling out, specifically Roger and David. And he's the only member of the band who's been there on every single album. So he's quite a good, what's the word? Not so much a mediator, but he knows how to be diplomatic. And he's used to that. And he's used to hearing other people's ideas. He wants you. I remember when we were rehearsing a few months back, first time after COVID. Well, not after COVID, we still have COVID. The first time we were able to get together, we played a song called Fearless. And at the end of it, he said, "Oh, that was a bit slow, wasn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it was." And then I was just thinking, it's funny because 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't have said that, but I'm that comfortable with him now that I can say that. And the thing is, he wanted to hear that. He wouldn't have asked the question otherwise.
Follow us on Instagram at the StageLeft Podcast, where you'll see behind-the-scenes photos from our interviews with members of Oasis, Queen and Madness.
The live recording at the Roundhouse, honestly, is one of the best sounding recordings I've ever heard for a live album. And the testament to that is I've got some quite nice speakers, and I was having to move from room to room.
Yeah.
And it went onto my Amazon, I won't say the name because it will trigger everyone at home. And it sounded amazing through that. And I was like, what? And I listened to it through headphones. It sounds incredible. So how did you go about getting the live sound so good? And is it quite a painstaking process to listen to the recordings and think, okay, what's the most suitable guitar tone that's going to go with to complement what else is playing? Like that sounds like it was a lot of effort, but maybe it wasn't.
It wasn't for us. The recording of it wasn't for us. That was all done by a gentleman called Nick Davis, and he just made sure he had the best mics on everything and good placement. And then we went into Rack Studios and cleaned everything up. He did record 2 nights, and there weren't any overdubs in the studio, but there were fly-ins, if you see what I mean. So I think I hit a dud note 3 times, although I hit 2 bad notes and got some feedback, and all he did was fly in the note from the night before, or I think one of them was on a solo where I change it every night, but I didn't even notice he changed it until I saw the film and realised, oh my God, that doesn't marry up, because I wasn't actually there when he did it, so I didn't know it happened, and I wasn't able to tell the film guys who were editing it, don't show my guitar at that point because I'm playing up here and my hands are down there. There weren't actually any overdubs, but he was able to get some. The source was brilliant to start with, and then we went to Abbey Road to mix it, and you can't really get any better than Abbey Road, and that was surround. We mixed it in surround and as well.
Fearless specifically, any guitarist listening to this who's the acoustic on that, I don't know if there's 1 or 2 acoustics on there, but it sounds like when you've just changed your strings and you've just tuned it up and just how fresh the new strings sound. It sounds exactly like that coming through the speakers or through your headphones. It's fantastically mixed.
That will be because Gary's strings on his acoustic were brand new. I think at every gig possibly.
But they don't always come through on the recordings as good as that.
No, it's true. Yeah, no, that was, I think I should think all of our, in fact, I know that all our strings were brand new that night. But there's just one acoustic. It's Gary playing acoustic on that, yeah.
And how did you agree to split parts? How did you work out who was going to play which parts? Was that a difficult conversation? Or
Good question. No, it wasn't difficult, actually. I think I always say that I end up with doing the parts that if you know those songs, I do the parts that you expect to hear. And Gary will do things like Gary adds his own solos. So he'll do a solo as a solo on the song Saucerful of Secrets. He has added a solo on that. He also added a solo to a track called Green is the Colour. And I think there's also one on, I won't go through a whole list, but I'm just thinking aloud. He has added solos, and I normally play the solos that are already there. I might not play them exactly like the record. In fact, I don't. But on the whole, but I do where they normally are solos. What I was going to say was also the other thing that makes it easy is that Gary's singing. So he obviously can't play little intricate parts while he's singing. And that's what I'll do.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And how do you, what's your process, or what's your advice around communicating on stage? Because some of those songs, obviously, you've got some songs that are 12 minutes long and stuff like that. So I guess you're not playing it exactly the same each time. So is there a method, is there like a secret kind of code that you have? One eyebrow means another chorus, whatever it might be. How do you communicate on stage at those?
No, we do rehearse them down. We rehearse quite down to a T, really. But then there is room when we're playing live for, and this has happened quite a lot. Nick will play differently every night. Sometimes he might play a slightly different rhythm to what he normally does. He listens to what's going on, and he just wants to. He's kind of like a jazzer in a way, and he does love jazz. What will happen is there might be a dynamic that he adds one night, and we'll go, "Oh, that's really good. Let's try and do that again." And then we'll listen back to the desk tape and say tape. They're not tapes, are they? But we listen back to the desk mix, and we'll clock where that was, and then we'll try and work that in. So it becomes, what's the word? I've gone blank. Of itself, it's I've gone completely blank, Chris.
It's just a unique take of that.
Yeah.
Do you mean a unique version, or?
No, it's sort of like I was thinking like how it's just a natural thing that happens.
Yeah.
It evolves. Yeah. And there aren't really, actually the funny thing is, if you listen to something like Interstellar Overdrive, I think what we do is that there is a structure that happens, but we know which parts of that structure we can improv in. So you won't get Interstellar Overdrive being 4 minutes one night and 10 minutes the next, because we don't want to do that. But I think it always stays within the same kind of framework. And I might play different old Pink Floyd riffs in it, but it takes the same amount of time to do that as it does to play that riff, things like that. Yeah.
Nice. It's interesting. I was obviously doing a lot of research for this, and it's interesting you said about how Nick plays it differently each time. Because one of the things I wrote down is that one of the characteristics of the Syd Barrett era was that Roger Waters Sid wouldn't play the same. He would change the composition of the song each time, and he wouldn't play it the same way twice in a row, which Waters thought was a genius, but others felt is really frustrating to play along with, which is understandable. So it's really interesting that there's that wiggle room to do things differently.
I think. Sorry, I was just going to think. You made me think about something, which is that the reason that I said we rehearsed down to a T, but actually it's not so that we can play it like that every night. It's so that we know this is it, and then we know where we can play around within it. It's like parrot fashion, isn't it? But so then at least like an actor knows their lines back to front, but they can change emphasis every night. That's what I mean, I think.
You've got giving yourself a freedom in a framework, basically. Which is you've got to tell us about the night that Roger Waters joined you on stage. That must have been such a moment for you. You must have, for a moment, wanted to pinch yourself. That would have been incredible.
There's two things about that. One is we did a Q&A, a video Q&A, just the five of us. And that was one of the questions. What was it like when Roger turned up? And we all hesitated. And there have been people on YouTube going, they obviously didn't like it. Look at the way they hesitated. And actually, the reason we hesitated is because we were all waiting for Nick to say something about it, because it's his dear friend, 50 years or whatever it is. There is no truth to that, to anyone saying that. We were literally waiting for Nick to say, and he didn't. So then we jumped in. When Roger turned up, it's a funny story, because we knew that he might come, but it got to the day and Nick didn't say anything. And so we thought maybe it's not going to happen. And then I turned up to do a sound check on my own while the others weren't there. And production manager came down and said, Nick wants to see you upstairs. And I thought, no one ever comes to me and says, no, Nick wants to see you upstairs. So I went upstairs and I walked in the room and the other guys, they're all in there, the four of them. And Nick goes, Roger's coming tonight. And I said, oh, wait. And he went, no, he is. And I went, ah. And then Gary goes, no, he is coming. I went, oh, he is. Okay. Because I thought, now it's 6:45 and we're being told he's coming. So obviously we're not going to get a rehearsal with it. Of course, he wrote the song. We knew he'd be doing Set the Controls if he came. But still, it'd be nice to go through it with him. So anyway, what had happened is that Roger had lost his phone. I think he'd left it in a cab. And he had no way of getting hold of Nick until the phone found its way back to him, which it did at that time, to tell him he was coming. So he turned up at, I think, about 8:15 or something. And we briefed him on how we did the song. And then he came out, and there's actually a really good, really well-edited fan video.
I saw it earlier. It's great.
Yeah. And Nick had the story that he would do every night, which was that I've been waiting to do this, Smash the Gong, for many years, because whenever we had it before, Roger would always turn up and do it. And we knew that if we were going to do this, that he would do that, because then the joke was that then Roger actually was there. And that's what happened. And no, it was great. And it was great to see them. It was lovely. I was really happy that he came and heard us honouring his music, as I would feel if David came as well. It was just great to have him there. And the really cool thing was, from where I was on stage, I'm looking right at the back of the Beacon Auditorium, where the exit door is that would take you back into the lobby. And for the first 2 or 3 numbers, Roger was there watching it. He was standing right at the back of the auditorium. And no one had the faintest idea he was there. He was standing behind them all watching it, because he wanted to see what it sounded like and looked like from back there. It was really funny. Yeah, no, it was a great night. And it was one of those mad feelings. I was at Earl's Court watching these guys, and now I'm practically in Pink Floyd, for 10 minutes.
And you know what? Going back to saying how good the sound quality is of what you're doing, he actually said before the song, I think maybe it was
yeah, he did a little chat.
You sound a lot better than we did back in.
Yeah, that's right. Which was great, which was lovely. And he's actually since been in Rolling Stone and said something. I make note of all these things, but he did say it was something like it was a pleasure to get up on stage with those guys, which was lovely. It's nice to not have to. I'm happy with you.
It's probably the best place to be.
Yeah.
So you're going on tour. I don't know if you're aware that. So I'm down in Brighton, and you're playing the Brighton Dome, and that's where the first time Summer Dark Side of the Moon was actually played. And Gilmour lives down here, so you never know. He might pop in at some point. So you got this tour coming up. How are you? Is it a lot of rehearsals going on now, or is it going to be something that's be kicking off soon?
Yeah, no, we actually had rehearsals in, I think it was October. We got together for the first time. We hadn't played since July 19, and it was now October 21. And then we got back together again in the end of November to do some more, to do some stuff with our in-ears, with our monitors and things like that. And we were supposed to that was because we were supposed to go off to North America in January, but obviously Omicron came along and stopped us from having to tour the east coast of America in those freezing conditions, which was I was actually quite happy about.
To put it there.
But I was really looking forward to playing, and that's now being rescheduled to September. So yeah, we're back out in, where are we now? We're February, aren't we? So we're out in 6 weeks' time. We start in Dublin. I've done so much rehearsing, Chris, I can't tell you. I've actually had to stop, because it gets to a point where it's just, you don't want it to get boring. But at the same time, there's nothing like standing next to everyone to find out, oh, God, I should have gone over that bit again. But, to be fair, we've all been stuck at home 2 years now, isn't it? And all that time we had thinking that, we're going to be back out in 5 months, and then that would be rescheduled, and then that would happen again, and then again. Yeah, there's been a lot of rehearsal.
There's been a lot of rehearsal, and I'm just having a look at what the dates are. So you're playing in the UK in April, and then, as you say, going to Belfast, York, then back in the UK, and then there's another 58 dates that you're playing across all of Europe,
right,
which looks amazing. So we've got, what we've got here, we've got Estonia, Finland, Norway.
It's quite intense, quite intensive. And we tend to do, sometimes I think we might do 3 shows. I mean, we don't work hard. The crew are unbelievable. There were instances in the past where we would do 3 shows in 3 different countries. It's one after the other for 3 days. Just, I don't know how those guys do it, but you've got that. And then we've got, like another roughly 30 in America, or North America, I should say. So it's a lot. It is a lot.
The dream, Lee. You're living the dream.
Yeah, can't wait. I can't wait.
What's one gig you've played that you, apart from Roger Waters' guest slot, what's one gig you played that you wish you could go back and be in the audience for and watch from the audience's perspective?
There was one gig we did in Luxembourg, in a place called Den Atelier, which was, we got to, well, it was like a small club. It was like when we launched the band, we played Dingwalls, and then we played the Half Moon in Putney, which was like really small. I mean, I couldn't even hear myself on stage. It was ridiculous. But they were really good fun because of the crowds. And when we did Luxembourg, when we got to the actual song Saucerful of Secrets, there's a part at the end that Gary sings chorally, and which David does on the original. And the whole audience joined in on it. And that it was just an amazing audience. And we could hear it above. We didn't have in ears in. We actually had wedges, but we could hear it above our wedges. That was incredible. I wouldn't mind being in the audience of that one. I think that would be a really good fun one. There was actually, you didn't ask me this, but one of the really cool things that happened was we actually played at the amphitheatre in Nîmes, where I had the idea for it.
Really?
Yeah, and
nice.
That was incredible. My parents came over, and my wife, obviously, because she's not far. And my dog came, but he didn't come to the show. But yeah, no, that was and my father-in-law, everyone. That was really cool to be there and do that. That was really cool.
What's the most surreal experience you can think of that, if you were to say to yourself when you were 18, playing the blues, etc., obviously playing Pink Floyd songs with members of Pink Floyd, that's got to be one of them, but anything particularly that's a particularly surreal experience in your career?
It's quite a lot. I think, I'm trying to think if it's surreal or whether it was just great, but a couple of them, really, and they're both Pink Floyd things. And one was when Guy had his 50th, he knew that I could manage musicians. I think he thought that would be a good bet for me to get everyone together for his 50th birthday party band. So I was put in charge of, funny enough, Gary wasn't put in charge of Gary. I was put in charge of finding out what the songs are we should play and who should play them. So we had Gary, we had Phil Manzanera, we had Chris Spedding, he's a fantastic guitar player, Chester Kamen, and David Gilmour. And I actually played with David that night. So that was quite surreal because I did actually pick the songs they should play, and because Guy's party was a mods and rocker themed party. So I figured we should only play songs from the sort of mid-60s, really. So I picked all those, and they said, what would David like to do? I put a spell on you, because I know that he's done that with Misha Paris, for instance. So we're doing stuff like that, and I got to play with David, and it was quite surreal doing that. And it was surreal when I first played with Nick in a rehearsal room, because especially when it was something like Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, because that part it's a sort of drum part that you hear other drummers doing it, and they always get it wrong, and it's really sparse, and he would just go, and that was surreal because there's actually no bass on it. It's actually just a guitar playing bass notes. So that was just me holding it down with Nick, and that was surreal the first time I did it. But there are other surreal moments. I think sitting down with my parents, how many times do I want to mention my parents? But sitting down with my parents when we had our premiere of the Roundhouse movie and seeing myself on this massive screen in a film, that was surreal, watching myself, but with them and seeing how proud they were.
So I've written down proud parents. Not only you live in the dream, but the fact that they took you to go and see Pink Floyd age of 7, and they're seeing you play those songs with members of that band is just, you should be, really proud of that. And I'm sure they're very proud of you.
Absolutely.
What do you think is one underrated skill that every musician should?
I think probably a couple of things come to mind. One is, I'm sure other people have said this, which is just listening. So therefore, I don't know if it is underrated, because I think probably a lot of people say it, but listening is an art in itself. I think one thing I've learnt from Nick is that, and I suppose this is obviously very useful with Pink Floyd music. It can go to other things. when you're playing live, if you've got an instrumental passage that you are perhaps improvising on that can go longer, you think that this is going on for ages and the audience is going to get bored. And when you listen back to it, it went on for 10 seconds. And actually it could go on for 40 seconds or 40, or a minute even. And I think that's why it's so important to listen. And often I'll find there'll be parts in songs where I'll look at Nick and he's not playing. And obviously, he won't decide not to play in the middle of something that needs a rhythm. But something like, we're going to attempt Echoes on the next tour. And there's a part in that. Yeah. In fact, it's called the Echoes Tour, actually. Great idea by management. But we do have a part in that where there's all these kind of weird ethereal noises going. And that is certainly a part. I think there's actually a thing in there with a guitar, and you put your guitar into a wah-wah, into the output of the wah, and the input from the wah goes into the amp, and it gets that strange seagull sound that appears on the track. And you do that 4 or 5 times and think, well, that's enough. But actually, when you listen back to it, no, it's a whole thing's. It's good to get it to a place where you're telling a story with the effects. And I think you can take your time with things. But you can only really do that if you're listening.
And my last question was going to be, what's the best bit of advice someone's ever given you? But maybe you've picked that up from Nick as well. Anything else that you think that advice people have given you that's helped your career to get to where?
Trying to think. I'm sure there must be loads. Yeah, I can think of something. And actually it goes back to what we've been talking about with this project, which is they can only say no. Don't be scared of asking someone to do something. I wasn't. All he could say is no. So if you, when you have an idea and you believe in it, you should believe in it.
And look where that's got you to now. So listen, thank you so much, Lee, for your wisdom, you've had an incredible career, particularly in the last couple of years. And I think there's a lesson in here for all musicians listening, actually, that there was a point where you didn't play guitar for a couple of years, and there was a point that you were working in middle management, and you're now about to go on a world tour of kind of 60 to 80 dates in America and the UK, in Europe, playing some of your favourite songs ever with one of your favourite ever musicians. That's given probably a lot of hope to a lot of people listening to this.
Yeah, I think people shouldn't be worried about the fact that they have to get money in the bank, and if they have to go and get another job or a job to support themselves, there's nothing bad about that. Most musicians are unemployed. Most musicians are, even well-known famous ones are unemployed. They might have money in the bank, but look, I mean, they're unemployed between albums and tours, and people who aren't, no one should feel bad about supporting themselves. You never know where it might end up.
And also how many of those skills are transferable as well. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. Listen, thanks for your time, thanks for your wisdom, thanks for your insight. Best of luck with the upcoming tour, and thanks for being such a great guest on the StageLeft Podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for asking me.
This episode was mixed and edited by Bastian Hues, Bastianhues. And that's little Eliza Day, my baby, 4-month-old, who's making a bit of noise in the background, giving a endorsement to Bastian. You should get in touch with him on Instagram, whether you need support with your mixing, your editing, your scoring, or your website design. Bastianhues. He's doing a great job.